welcome to another On the Line Perspectives on Partition, in which people from across the political and community spectrum share their thoughts on one of the defining events in modern Irish history, the partition of the island 100 years ago. My name is Paul McFadden. The series is organised by the Bloody Sunday Trust, and our guest today is the Mayor of Lisburn and Castlereagh City Council, Councillor Nicholas Trimble. Mr. Mayor, first of all, thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme and on this series, and for agreeing to go on the record with your thoughts on partition. And to get one thing out of the road just straight away, you are indeed a member of that very famous political family. Lord Trimble is your father.
Yes, he is indeed. You know, for my sins, but it's part and parcel of a bit of Northern Ireland syndrome, in that you can't go anywhere without somebody knowing you. But it's when I'm involved in politics, it follows me around much more so. You know.
Well, has it been a help or a hindrance, the Trimble name?
Do you know what? I think it's probably has been both at times, but no, I mean, hilariously, if you'll allow me to share a little anecdote, whenever my dad was involved in politics, I was growing up. I think I was like 11 years old at the time of the Good Friday Agreement, just for context. I looked at politics and said, there's no way I'm getting involved in that. I don't want anything to do with that. And me and my siblings were the same, so we all ended up doing different things. And only back in like 2014/2015, through a school friend, did I helped him in his council campaign in 2014, and sort of got hooked in that way. And before I knew it, I was a councillor myself. You know, so it's through a route completely independent of my dad that I ended up being a member of a political party, put it that way. Nobody believes me when I say that, but that's what happened.
Yeah, but there was me wondering if it was an inevitable destination for you. So not at all.
No. I mean, I spent, well, still now, I suppose, most of my working life I've spent in the private sector, just in various sort of accountancy and finance roles, just working in Belfast, you know, completely apolitical. So really just from about 2014, I signed up and joined the party, and you know, I find it's like a church. The moment you stick your head up and say you can do something, they say, brilliant, that's your job for life, and here's a few other things you can do. So because I ended up, I came in and took over the role as treasurer of our Lagan Valley Association, just because I was working in accountancy and good with numbers. And yeah, before you knew it, oh, you're good, let's give you this to do, and you stand for election, and here you go. You know, so a bit of a strange journey, but.
There's me wondering, accountancy and finance skills, what possible use could they be in politics here? We'll let that slide. Let's begin with the whole point of what this series is about. We're discussing the centenary of partition, which was one of the defining events in modern Irish, British, a significant European event as well. What are your thoughts on it? You know, looking back as a young man involved in politics, looking back at that historic act which happened 100 years ago.
Do you know what? I think, I mean, obviously I'm not 100 years old, and, you know, we don't really have any sort of living memory. There's, you know, obviously we'll have a few centenarians knocking about, but for by and large, most of us, this is something we've read about in the history books. And I think what's happened recently, just sort of the discourse of this year, I think it's highlighted a lot of people maybe know little bits about the formation of Northern Ireland, the partition of Ireland, but actually don't really appreciate the full detail of what happened. I mean, in many ways, you know, they say history always repeats itself, and the political turmoil that Ireland was in at the time, you know, we had the home rulers, you know, those who wanted, you know, Ireland for the Irish, and then those who had that unionist British identity said, we don't want to be cast adrift from mainland UK. That sort of narrative is even still playing out today, because obviously with the EU exit, you know, with Brexit, and then the Northern Ireland Protocol, you see the same graffiti on the walls now, no to an Irish sea border, and we would have had no home rule, you know, looking back 100 years ago. So it's really just quite remarkable how things are very different, but in many ways they're actually the same.
Yeah, as a unionist, as a young unionist, I mean, you're talking about living memory. I mean, I'm even conscious of how, over the course of your political lifetime, how dramatically different things are. You were saying only 11 years of age at the time of the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, and it's a very, very short span in the history of this island. But one of those recent events, which has been seismic itself in its impact, has been Brexit and all that has ensued from that. What are your thoughts as a young unionist on Brexit?
Brexit, and I think for me, has changed the conversation about the British Isles. Definitely. I mean, there's the Scottish independence referendum, and then in the context of Brexit, suddenly people say, oh, well, we need to revisit that as well. I think it's changed the conversation. We're still in an environment. I think it's really too soon to say what the actual outcome is, because in many ways we are still in the process of leaving. I mean, there was extension after extension before the UK formally left, and now the Northern Ireland Protocol. I mean, well, we've got legal challenges against it, and people saying it needs to be scrapped. But if it's scrapped, the answer, the question inside is what goes in its place, because we now have a land border from a non-EU state to an EU state, running between Northern Ireland and Ireland. So there has to be something. So it has definitely changed the conversation a lot, and made a lot of people think well, what is my identity? What is my culture, and what do I want to see myself as? I was at one of our political conferences a few years ago. We had Labour MP Owen Smith speaking to us, and he said something that sort of resonated with me. He said, "I'm Welsh, I'm British, and I'm European." And and those were three facets of his identity that intermingled. They were distinct, but they intermingled. And now you're having that conversation now. People who say, "Well, I cherish my European identity, but I'm British." So what happens? Or I'm Irish, and I don't feel myself as European. There's a whole spectrum of dynamic there. So really, I don't think I can shine any light into where the outcome is, what we're going to do out of this, because there's so many different opinions out there, and ultimately there's a circle that needs squared, as they say, in terms of finalizing what the end product is going to look like with the UK outside the European Union, and having a system that works both for us and for the EU.
One thing you can do, of course, is none of us can predict the future, but you can speak for yourself. I mean, as a modern, young, progressive unionist, I mean, what would you say? How would you describe your identity, your culture?
Well, I mean,
who you are.
Something that peeved me growing up, I suppose, was that everything was always used to the lens of are you British or Irish? And nowadays, I think there is that sort of that mentality that you can say it's okay to say I'm Northern Irish. That everything was, I felt it was used as a mechanism to try and polarize, because I view myself as Northern Irish and as British. But
and you're along with about a third of the population, based on the very recent poll there, in which a third of the people did express that wish to have the view that they see themselves as Northern Irish, that identity.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I don't think as well there's anything wrong with viewing yourself as British, but also incorporating an Irish identity into that. I mean, in many ways, the Northern Irish identity for me is the best of both worlds. I love British humor. I love Irish culture. The two of them can coexist in the same person, and I don't see any contradiction in that. And do you know what? I see myself as European as well, because you ask me where I'd rather go. Would I rather go to France or to I don't know, Egypt? I'd probably say I'd go to France. Like I feel more culturally connected to France and Germany and Italy, Spain. That European dynamic. I mean, where our countries' histories are intermingled with each other over centuries. But having said that, cards on the table, I did vote to leave when the referendum came up, but I don't think that disallows me from having a European identity.
Are you still comfortable with that vote, having expressed a preference to leave? Has it panned out the way you thought it might?
No, it hasn't panned out the way I thought it might, because to me, when that vote came along, I mean, you sort of have to put yourself back at the time. My thought was, do we say, leave or remain? And I thought remain is that basically saying you're giving, full credence to the way the European Union is running at the moment. And that's something I have huge issue with. The EU, the European Union as a political institution, I have great difficulties with, and I think anyone who has been involved with it, will say, look, there's difficulties there, just in the operations of it. So when I voted leave, that was my way of saying I'm not content with the status quo. Now, that was not a vote for a hard Brexit. It was not saying, we're pulling in the plank and sailing away and saying, see you later. That it wasn't that. So I think it's too soon to say whether that was the right move or not, because we're still in that process, hilariously, years later. But it's going to be such a long process still before it's ironed out, I think.
Knowing what you do now, if you were allowed to, have the same voter cast the vote all over again, do you think you'd vote the same way?
Yes, I think I would. Yeah. And it comes down to me, it's that the way the EU institution is run, and the what's the buzz phrase? It's the ever closer union idea. I don't see there being anything wrong with having your own, sovereign nation as part of a trading bloc, as part of a group of nations that worked for the betterment of each other. But it's when the idea, I think for me, is when the nation state idea gets sequestered into part of a greater union. That's where I have a little bit of I'm overly cautious about that. So push comes to shove, I think I still would, but but I would be less adamant about it, I suppose, now, given the current context.
Let's leave or move that union aside now for now, and let's speak about the other one, the one that we're focusing on in this series. How would you assess the state of the union now, 100 years after partition?
It's a good question. I mean, the political dynamic today is similar. I think it's a lot better than the dynamic that was there 100 years ago, because don't forget, at the time, there was the Irish War of Independence essentially was raging, and it was a turbulent time. Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, there was real fear, in the air about fear for people's own safety, and the Unionists / British identity folk who were in Ireland at the time, I think they had a very real fear of not having somewhere where they would have been safe, given this sort of separatist home rule surge of opinion. So I mean, and that's that's why Northern Ireland was formed. That's why there was the two separate Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland in the Home Rule Bill, to provide somewhere that those who had that British identity, where they would have a home to call their own, politically, a political home. Where the union is today, I like to think it's probably just in much the same situation as it was then, because political boundaries do change in any country over the years. The political stances of people change as well. But I think the act of union probably does need revisited, because you've got England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and there's a different settlement in each of these places. The devolved institutions are wholly different, and there's no single thread, I suppose, of governance throughout them all. Now, I accept the history of our settlement in Northern Ireland, is one that has had to accommodate, two potentially polar opposite identities, or two identities that for many years had been knocking heads together, and that's maybe a dynamic that wasn't there in Wales and Scotland. But I think there's probably merit in saying we need to revisit that and say, let's form a union that everyone can be comfortable in and safe in, and whether that requires a political shift, whether it requires a legislation shift, I don't think so. I think it's maybe just a cultural shift is required. But no, I don't see that the union is falling apart, as some people might like to say. It's been around for many years, and I think it'll be around for many years to come. And that's something that, as I think, is the strength of the union of the United Kingdom, and that is that it has that plasticity to adapt and evolve, and take in cultures from all over the years. When people arrive, they bring their culture, and it is modified and adapted into part of a grander tapestry.
I mean, it's very interesting to hear you speak that way. I mean, you do see a longer, or even long-term future for the union, and that's despite, you know, everything that's been happening in recent years, the instability of as a result of Brexit, the recent kind of tensions between the two parts of the community here, all of that, what's happening in Scotland. You still are, you sound confident. Am I right in saying that you're confident about the union as it exists here having a longer term future?
I'm no Mystic Meg from the National Lottery, you know. But no, I do. I think woe to anyone, I suppose, who is too hasty to make huge, big political changes without them being thought out. And I don't think anybody wants to do that. You know, I don't think anyone's going to say, let's have a referendum on leaving the UK and, you know, joining United Ireland or Scotland leaving. Let's do that tomorrow. I don't think anybody's saying that. So I think there has to be a mature conversation about it. But I think you know, there is an inherent strength, I suppose, in existing institutions, and especially institutions that are willing to adapt and change, which I think we do have, you know. So yeah, I would say I would be surprised if the union started to break apart, you know, in the next decade or so. You know, I would be very surprised. I think there's a greater resilience there than some commentators might speculate.
Do you know what's been fascinating throughout this series has been the number of people from right across the political spectrum who have said, let's have that kind of mature conversation. The number of people who are up for that kind of conversation. I mean, you sound like a confident young unionist. Things like the looming prospect of a border poll, does that unnerve you? Would you fear that kind of thing happening?
No and yes. And I only say yes just because I don't think the climate at the moment is capable of having that mature conversation, just because of the context of Brexit and also the context of COVID. I mean, we're not in everyday normality yet at all, and it probably won't be for another year or two at least. But I think that Brexit issue needs to resolve a little bit further, or at least needs to bed in a little bit more, you know, before things can calm down and we can say, okay, let's focus on the constitutional issue. And I mean, my own view, you know, I'll make no bones about it, but my own view is I think Northern Ireland and the Northern Irish people are better maintaining that, you know, political link with the UK, you know. But I perfectly accept that there's those who will, you know, have a counter argument to that and say, no, actually, my identity is stronger as Irish, and you know, yeah, you'll have people who view the British identity as an imposter in these islands, which I do take issue at that, you know, and I know I'm maybe building a strong man because nobody, you haven't said that and I haven't said that, but you know, there is that sentiment there, and I think that sentiment needs to be just, you know, calmed a little bit to enable people to have that conversation, because I think that is what's been a barrier to having a proper constitutional conversation, where people say you're saying I need to go home, whereas I've lived here for, you know, 10 generations. You know, your identity should not factor in, I think, in saying who should and should not be here. You know, I mean, we wouldn't say that for someone who was French or you know, Palestinian or you know, Mexican, you know, coming here. You know, we like to think we're an enlightened people and would welcome people from all backgrounds. So those two backgrounds, British and Irish, should in theory be able to coexist and be able to say, do you know what, let's park age-old rivalries and say, let's have a proper conversation with each other.
I want to just turn to, I have in front of me here, I mean, I've printed out the message which the Queen issued to mark the centenary of Northern Ireland. And I found the second last paragraph of it particularly interesting. In it, the Queen said, across generations, the people of Northern Ireland are choosing to build an inclusive, prosperous and hopeful society, strengthened by the gains of the peace process. May this be our guiding thread in the coming years. I'm mindful, you know, of the fact that at the moment your main political opponents, the DUP, are in the throes of a leadership contest between two people who will have to determine what way that party moves ahead. I'm just, given what the Queen said there, I'm wondering what that says to political unionism in Northern Ireland. I can almost, in the back of my head, imagine how your father, Lord Trimble, would have reacted on hearing those words, because it sounds as though it's an absolute endorsement of the kind of process that got underway in the Good Friday Belfast Agreement.
Yeah, look, I mean, when I joined politics, obviously, the fact that my dad had been in the Ulster Unionist Party, that I'm not going to say that wasn't a factor, but I didn't choose to join the DUP because I've never been a fan of that prevaricating posture of, I'm going to be hardline and tell you, point the finger and shout, and I'm making a caricature, but that's never been me. I've always wanted to see people work by consensus, and that message from the Queen, actually, I think that's, there's your blueprint there of what the next 100 years need to look like, well, regardless of the constitutional change, if there is one, because you've people from different, different identities in this space that we call Northern Ireland. And regardless of what happens, we need to make sure that this is a place where everyone feels welcome and everyone can feel included. And I think there is maybe a fear there in the more hardline unionist community, is that, we'll be sidelined if it ever happened. We'll be sidelined and pushed away, and there's an inherent fear there. But that's something I think that maybe conversations need to be had to abate that and say, do you know what? No, let's talk to each other instead of shouting at each other, which is something I've never been keen on. I mean, speaking of all things Centenary, here in Lisburn, Castlereagh, we set up our working group to look at our Centenary programme. We did it before COVID. I always think of things pre and post COVID now, but I think it was like November, December 2019, around that time. And what we decided to do was we'll have a representative from each political party, regardless of how many seats they had in the chamber, because Lisburn Castlereagh, it is a unionist dominated council, but we said no, we'll have one person from each political party so that we can come to a programme that everybody can feel in some way, I'm content with that, instead of feeling that they're excluded. So I mean, we had, there was DUP, UUP, Alliance, SLP, Sinn Féin and Green, on it. So it was mathematically perverse because the Unionist was in a minority on that working group, but actually I think it was the best thing to do and the best option, because it meant that what we did, everyone could say, do you know what, I can subscribe to that. That's something I can get behind. So I think that attitude needs to be more prevalent in this place, in Northern Ireland, because for years, I mean, you look at the peace process, you look at the Good Friday Agreement, the huge work it was to bring unionism along to sign up to the Good Friday Agreement, because I mean the nationalist community were supported it resoundingly, and again it's fear. I think that fear is what was the overriding emotion of I don't want to see myself get squashed here. So I think there needs to be that openness and that saying, you know what, it's okay to work with each other, talk to each other, rather than shouting at each other. So, and that I think is the blueprint for the next 100 years, regardless of your constitutional position.
I mean, as you talk, I'm also conscious of the fact that as we assess, how successful or otherwise the union has been and that whole experience has been, it's kind of an indictment of not necessarily the union, but politics, modern politics, that the charity that you've adopted for your year as mayor of Lisburn and Castlereagh has been, well, the local food bank or local food banks, which indicates a job of work that still has to be done for many people in our society who don't feel, to use your words, welcome and comfortable and safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've said it in the past as well. Like, it's terrible that we live in a world that food banks have to exist, but but I'm glad that they do, because people who need them, they are real lifelines for them. And yeah, it's the fact that they are there is proof, I suppose, that there are people who are not being caught by society in some in some way or form. They've fallen through the cracks. There's either they've lost jobs, they can't get an income in, or their situation has changed, or whatever. They're in emotional or financial distress. I think in a modern society, it's is this a critique of modern capitalism? I'm more in the view of what was it Churchill said. It's the worst form of government except all the others that we've tried. Yeah. Yes, it is. It's an indictment, I suppose, that's happened. But at least we have something that is catching people, because that's the end goal that I don't want to see, is that Northern Ireland, for all of us, we become less prosperous, that we go downhill. I think governance and local government should be about creating a place where that lifts everybody up, socially, economically, educationally. We should be able to lift everybody up together. And if we can't do that, then we're leaving someone behind, and that's something that I don't want to do. But like I'm only a councillor. I'm not up at Stormont. I'm not going to point the finger at any one party or anything. I mean, the Stormont, I think, has been the example of something that could work so well, but has for many years prevaricated at each other, instead of actually delivering for the people right on the ground, because that's what government should be about, I think.
Is that something that can be fixed, do you think?
I think it can. Like, no problem is insurmountable. It just requires a political will to do it, and that's where the big stagnation in our politics in Northern Ireland's come from, is people saying, I'm going to grandstand on a pet project or just attack somebody else, instead of saying, what does the everyday Joe and Jane, or whatever you want to say, what do they need? What do the people of our country that we live in together, what do we need to prosper together? And if all our politicians had that attitude, this country would be different. I mean, the institution at Stormont, it was groundbreaking, I suppose, at the time in '98, whenever we through the years of negotiating to get it to happen. And there was so much hope in the air. Everyone said, this is fantastic. I am so optimistic for the future, and it could have been amazing, and I suppose, and it was, but we never moved on from '98. In fact, we said, okay, well, here's the architecture of that arrangement, and now we've just sort of drifted into our silos in that institution, and it's not working in the way that it was originally intended. That's my own view. But
your father memorably coined the phrase, in which he acknowledged that in the past Northern Ireland had been a cold house for Catholics. From the way you're talking, that can never happen again and should never happen again.
Oh, absolutely. No, there's no way any one side of the society should say, that this is our place and this is not a place for you. I mean, that never should that happen. This is what I mean about sort of being able to reconcile and work with each other. And in many ways, in 21st century Northern Ireland, well, in the 21st century Western world, I suppose, we're very easy at working with anyone from any background in our social lives, in our professional lives. He's a Muslim, doesn't matter. We're working together. I'll sit beside you in the office. Or he's an atheist, it doesn't matter. But for some reason in politics, suddenly, the walls go up and we're not able to talk to each other. And it's just a cultural shift that needs to happen with our political leaders. Because we can manage it in all other walks of life. I
have to say, over the last half hour we've been talking here, you sound very, very different. It's not a criticism at all of him, but you sound very different to your father. You sound much more relaxed. But is there also in your head some admiration and some acknowledgement for what your father did? Because let's face it, the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement, could not have happened without him. I mean, he was a key figure in all of that, and you saw at close quarters what he went through, what he experienced, what he suffered, maybe politically as a result of all of that process. Is there a sneaking, or maybe not so sneaking, bit of admiration for the old fellow?
Oh no, it's not so sneaky. No, absolutely. I mean, I suppose why I'm more relaxed is I don't think I take myself too seriously, you know. With the but like the world I have grown up in is not the world that he grew up in. I mean, you know, he when he got involved in politics from being a law lecturer in Queen's, and I think the instigating, the catalyst for him was when his friend and colleague Edgar Graham was shot on campus, you know, and murdered. And you know, I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but his view there was, this is not the country I want to live in, you know. And rather than get up and leave, he said, you know, this country needs to change, and that was the catalyst for him getting politically active. But I mean, like by his office, he had a constituency office first in Lurgan and then Banbridge, and the one in Lurgan I recall as a child, and I didn't appreciate it as a child, but you know, a viable device, you know, what was posted to the office, you know, you know, it was spotted because I think there was some suspect powder was leaking out of it, and everyone cleared out, you know. But there was that there, you know, he had to have police escort with him wherever he went from a security point of view. You know, arms, groups of protesters outside the house. I remember growing up, you know, Trimble the traitor banners or whatever, you know, they were being held up, lit, and you know, I accepted it. It's amazing what you can normalize as a child, you know, but after 98, you know, the political climate totally changed, and that's where my formative years were. You know, he's grown up in a world where things were bad, and he grew up through all of the troubles. You know, so I have no hesitation in justifying why he might be a bit more abrupt with people, you know, politically anyway, that I've been, you know, because he's had to be, you know, he's had to drag unionism kicking and screaming, I suppose, in some respects, to sit down at a table with people, because I mean that was a huge hurdle in and of itself, you know, in sort of the years 96 to 98. But no, everyone loves their own dad, or they have some kind of admiration for him. And it's whenever you're doing GCSE history and you're reading about him, you know, your own dad in the books, you know, going, oh right, so that's what Dad did, right? Okay, you know. You know, no, I mean, I agree with you. I don't think this country would be where it is if not for him and the people he had around him at the time. Because, you know, we face, you know, hard times create great men, you know, great men create easy times, whatever. There's a meme online about that, but it is that the situation required great statesmen from all sides of the community to come forward, and they did. You know, they were shaped by their times, and you know, we needed them then. And that's maybe, you know, a flippant point to say, you know, that's maybe what's happened with our political leaders at the moment, is that they've forgotten how bad things could be, and so have allowed you know, things politically to stagnate so much. Yeah.
You say it's amazing what you can normalize as a child, and I look forward to all of us normalizing things as adults as well. Mr. Mayor, look, thanks a million for joining us on this series and for agreeing to go on the line with your perspective on partition. We're very grateful to you for joining us. So it's great to talk to you. And
my pleasure, Paul. Thank you for having me.
Let's let this be part of that mature conversation that you and so many in this series have called for.
Thank you.